Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar of Merging Technology. Again, we had a little break in our webinars, and we're starting again with a series again. The first one will be the HAPI Mkii, which is just available as a device. So it's a new version of our famous HAPI. And this time round, I am accompanied by Rune, which is just under me here.
Hello everyone, nice to meet you.
Like always, those webinar, you have the chat box and you can ask your questions if you have any or remarks in the chat box, and we'll try to keep on and replying to them either directly or a little bit later, depending if it's right to the topic or not. So the idea of this webinar is a little bit to explain at the same time for people who know HAPI or own a HAPI one, what the HAPI Mkii brings. What are the new things, new features, and so on and so on. And at the same time, for people who have no idea what the HAPI is, either one or two or Mark II and that aspect, what this device is doing and how can you configure it and so on and so on. So here is a little presentation. First, you see the slide is that we will show what is new, how does it work, what are the different cards, optional cards available, and how do you work with the infrastructure. I will also have an emulator of basically the screen of the HAPI Mkii that I will show then in a little while so that you can see how the structure of the menus and so on are put together. Great. So let's move on to the next page. And the first thing is that we will have here a few little things that we're going to explain. The first thing to know basically is that the front cover or the front aluminium panel has been changed. It's written Mark II now, and it's still a one unit device or unit, and I mean in terms of its size. And you can still on the left and on the right when you purchase it add those little metal devices,
Rack
so that
ears, yeah.
rack ears, thank you, so that you can rack your device if you need or if you want to, or remove them the other way if you don't want them. Good. What is the HAPI Mkii? Basically, you have on the rear here at the bottom, you have two expansion slots in which you can put in optional cards. Those cards are mainly providing analog in and outputs or also digital in and outputs. We will see those different cards in a little while, what it is and so on. You have here some word clock in and output. This is the same as HAPI Mkii on BNCs. So HAPI is generating word clock as well, and obviously you can slave it to the word clock. You have a little DB20, sorry, that's a DB15, not a DB25, a DB15 connector on which you can have an adapter that is optional. And this adapter has all the synchronization capabilities, LTC, which is timecode, MIDI in and out, for example, from some keyboard commands or other stuff. And it has also video reference signal that is generated from the HAPI that can be fed to sorry, it's a video reference in, so it's not a generator, excuse me, the other way around, and so that you can slave from a video reference your HAPI device to a house clock, for example. Then this is new, and we'll go through the features in detail, but you in the HAPI Mkii, you have two active RG45 connectors. As you very well know, certainly, is that the HAPI is connected via the network to your computer, to your workstation, for example, or to another network to be able to feed audio over the network. And now both connectors are active, and this will bring us the capability to have something. Has quite a horrible name, but it's called ST2022-7, which is basically a protocol that provides redundancy over the network. That means that if you implement this protocol, which is implemented in the HAPI Mkii, but if you implement it into your infrastructure with your workstations and other hardware devices and so on, is that you will have two cables carrying the same signal, the same audio signal through it. And if one fails, either the cable is cut or one of the device somewhere fails, the other cable with the same devices but connected with this protocol will be able to continue without any loss. The streaming, the recording, I mean, the signal still goes through one of these two cables, and this is a complete redundancy. This is obviously very much used in the broadcast area, but one could imagine that in many different applications, simply recording, audio recording in an orchestra and things like that, where mostly it's not permitted to fail, you could develop this type of redundancy as well. We're going to come to a few details a little bit later about this as well. And we still have this DB25 ASCBU connector. So you have 8 ASCBU, 4 pairs of ASCBU in and output through this DB25 connector. And on the left side, you have here an ADAT optical in and out, so 8 channels in ADAT. And you can, through your settings, also convert it into, or modify it into a Toslink SDIF in and output in 2 channels over the optic. And you have your headphone output. So it is basically 2 physical outputs with the same signal, one in a mini jack and one in a normal jack. So you can have 2 people, or if you forget your adapter, you know exactly where to plug it. And on the left side here, you have this triangle, which is the on-off switch, basically, of the entire device. That's about the HAPI Mkii. So completely similar on the design, on the look, and the size, and the connectors of the HAPI MkI, for those who know it. So what is new? What are the new features in HAPI Mkii? The channel-based routing basically can now be routed individually. You until now in HAPI 1, you, for example, when you were routing your 8 analog inputs, you needed to route them per 8 channels to the MADI, for example, if you had a MADI option, or to the ASCBU, or to the network. You couldn't say, I want 4 channels for the ASCBU and 4 channels for the network. So this is now, you can do that individually today. And for some people, it's useful because they can split it lower than for 8 channels. So that's improved, or it's new. What has been dramatically improved is the headphone quality output. In 2 ways. It's circuitry, first of all, so the specs are much, much better. Basically, for those who know our fantastic Anubis here, which has also 2, which has 2 independent headphone outputs. The HAPI has 1 with 2 connectors, but it's more or less the same. I mean, it's not exactly the same specs as the Anubis, but it is very similar in its sound. But this is what is important compared to the HAPI 1, is that it supports also the DSD and the volume support, so that you can, if you work in DSD, you can modify your volume that you have in your headphone output. So this is an important feature.
I'm sure that since the days the Anubis original was launched, the focus on headphones and the quality of headphones has gone a different way. It's the headphones become more and more important in all types of productions, and yeah, as you say, I think everybody who gives it a listen can really hear a difference. I think it's one of the really good things with, as you mentioned, the Anubis as well, the headphone amps. I think people often think a headphone amp is a headphone amp, and it really is not. There is really a big sonic difference from one to another, and we have taken this a big step ahead.
Exactly. And what is, I think, interesting, if you look a bit further, we talk about the HAPI in this webinar here, the HAPI Mkii. This is the main thing. But if you imagine an infrastructure where you have a HAPI Mkii and an Anubis for musical recording, for example, and you will have, for example, the HAPI in the recording room and the Anubis in the studio. And you would like to provide also a quality headphone to the artist, or the artists in plural, who are in the studio. So now this time the headphone output is equally as good on the HAPI Mkii. So you have the one in your studio for yourself and you're happy with it, or vice versa, because it's a stream that is available on the network and you can connect it. So you can connect an auxiliary or cue that goes out and send it and use it for the artist, for example, or the comedian, or if it's a voice recording, or the singer, or whatever. So this is an important thing, that you can really count on it and use it. As I said, The front panel is new. It's still an aluminum front panel, but with a new engravement. And the plexiglass has changed so that the OLED is dimmed. I mean, can be dimmed, sorry, to have the same light. Before it was at its maximum. And after a few years, that was the only little weak point of HAPI 1, is that some of the OLEDs have died after 4 years or something like that. And this will not be the case anymore because they don't need to be full light constantly to be able to see what's going on the HAPI. Again, the ST2022-7 support, this is this redundancy over the network. It is very important to understand that this is available, but it means that your entire infrastructure needs to support this protocol to be able to have redundancy. Good evening, Dennis. I just see that you say hello. Good evening to you. What is interesting is that as you have two RG45 connectors for the redundancy, as we just explained, you can change them in the settings to be able to work in what we call the switch mode. So it means that coming back to this little studio set, as we were explaining before, but let's imagine we go do some live recording, mobile recording basically, not necessarily live, but mobile recording, we could use the HAPI Mkii as a little switch. That means on one of the connectors we could connect an Anubis, and the other connector we can connect our workstation. And that means that it's always the same story with when you go mobile. You want to be as light as possible with the least devices as possible to avoid potential failures. So having the switch of two connections within the Anubis Mark II can provide you this possibility. Now, nevertheless, we have to be very clear here. We only guarantee it for two hardware devices plus a workstation. So not that you daisy chain 25 devices, this will not work. So to be very clear, it's a small setup, for example, with a HAPI and a HAPI Mark II and a Horus, or a HAPI Mark II and an Anubis, for example, plus a computer, and that will work all fine. So to the question of Keon Rich, hello Keon, we are here talking about HAPI Mark II, which is not the Anubis, but I'm happy to answer your question. But you have tons of webinars on the Anubis, so please refer to them. But yes, it can be used as a single device interface with in and outputs, and it's connected over the network, not over USB. So Thunderbolt adapter to network, RG45, and off you go. Good. The next point here is that we implemented in the HAPI Mark II new DA roll-off filters that will also be available not on all cards. So we have now nearly 9 years or perhaps even 10 years, I'm not sure now, the first generation of the cards with the Horus and then the HAPI, our DA cards, and some old ones will not be able to have the different filters. But more recent one will also benefit from those different DA roll-off filters. We have now different trims for each channel and polarity change, which is new. Before it was only per 8, and this applies to all cards. And we have steps by 0.1 dB on our outputs, so that for some people who were asking this feature for previously, this is now supported in HAPI Mark II with all cards, and so you can really trim your outputs with precision. And the headphones as well, the headphones output can be trimmed independently and the polarity can be changed. The way for those who own a HAPI or Horus until now, the firmware update basically, which is not absolutely necessary, but for people who like to keep up, people like to get the new features that are coming with new firmware updates and so on. So the methodology now is done as well as it is done in Z-Man. In Anubis with the Z-Man. So it means it's much faster than traditionally what happened with HAPI and Horus. So this is just maintaining your firmware and in your HAPI Mark II, but it's nice that you don't need to spend too much time doing it.
And
A
I
few
think
things.
these
Excuse me.
I think these 10 points pretty much. I hope if there is some current happy owners out there, I think we have done a good job in listening to what we have been gaining in the field the last years with the happy, and taking all these into consideration while making the version 2. All the
Exactly.
little, yeah,
We tried as much, of course, like we always do, to listen to our users, to talk to. We have the chance to talk to some of them, to visit some of them, and to meet some of them. Also, unfortunately, it's not happening so much now, but during exhibitions and so on. And we take notes and we try, of course, to implement and to modify things and to make them better each time. Um, in terms of the cards, as I was saying before, so the I/O cards that you go put in those slots, most of them will also benefit from the new features with the independent trims, with the steps of zero point 0.1 dB, and so on and so on. Be aware the firmware is now called HAPI Mkll, not HAPI, because there will be two independent firmwares, one for the older HAPI and one for the HAPI Mark II. Don't mix them up. One is for one device, the other one is for the other device. And I think, Rune, we have now
yeah,
already the newest firmware for HAPI
yeah.
Mark II.
If you go on the website, it should be relatively clear for hopefully for all of you. But everything is already on there. If you are more curious, you can find the user manual for the HAPI Mkll and so on. So everything is ready and to be found on the website already.
Exactly. Um, Important to understand the box, basically the aluminium device or the outside look has more or less the same as the HAPI One, apart from the front panel. But inside everything is new in terms of the circuitries, the motherboard, and so on and so on. So now what we implemented our Z-Man that has FPGA and DSP. So you can imagine that in the future there could be some development with some new features that will be implemented in the HAPI while using the HAPI Mark II, clearly, while using the processing power with the DSP processing power of the Z-Man chip in there. So stay tuned. That will be announcements and firmware updates that will come in the future. The HAPI Mark II supports obviously Animan, or the other way around. Animan supports HAPI Mark II. So this is our audio network manager, our virtual patch, for those who don't know it, so that you connect or interconnect in and outputs from hardware devices to other hardware devices, from DAWs to hardware devices, or DAW to DAW, and so on. As I was saying before, the switch mode in our HAPI Mark II, and not only our HAPI Mark II, the switch mode in generally all our devices, supports two hardware devices plus a workstation. So, I mean, a DAW. Don't go over it because it's not guaranteed anymore, and don't think you can daisy chain it and put 25 machines together. That's not designed for. Good. In terms of the cards, um, there are webinars talking about specifically the cards, not only the technology, but also the elements, the measurements, and all of that. I would refer, please refer to those webinars or to our website if you want, if you have really technical questions about this. But to give you just a quick overview and idea, those cards, we have different cards. They're analog cards that go, those cards go in those slots behind the HAPI Mark II. So you have now a new generation that is available, the third generation of our AKD card, which is basically an 8 input line and mic pre-input card with direct out. So that means that you have a DB25 connector where you have your 8 analog inputs that you can then switch whether line or mic pre with 48 volt and so on independently. And you have another DB25, which is basically the direct out once those inputs have been mic preed. And so it's a direct output. If you want to send it, for example, to another recorder, or if you want to send it to a board or to an analog table, or simply use it somewhere else for in-ear monitoring or whatever it is. What is new with those cards as well? So it's an AKD chip. And what is new with those cards as well apart from their excellent sound and so on, is that you can control the gain from two controllers, basically, so that you can have an independent gain for controller one and for controller two, right? So basically front of house and in ear.
And that's
And
why it's GG in the name. Yeah. So the
exactly,
dual
that's why
gain,
dual gain, we added the
and
dual gain.
it's stuff we learned from the Anubis as well.
Exactly. Uh, Last thing, perhaps for those who are not familiar, we always have cards with a P and without a P. Basically, the P means premium. So the normal card without the P goes up to 192 kilohertz in terms of its sample rate frequency. And the P, or the car with the P, goes above to DSD and DXD, but also to PCM 300, 84 kilohertz, or DXD in 352.4 kilohertz as well. Then we have the other card, which same size, goes in one slot as well, and you have two DB25 connectors as well, but this time it is a ADGA card. So 8 inputs with mic pre-line, 48 volt, and 8 outputs as a line out. So you will see those line out in your workstation, in your DAW, so that you can output whatever you want. And this is the version now that has been launched last year, more or less 1 year ago. And you have a standard version up to 192K, and again, a premium version higher than 192K. And you have the DA card, so 8 analog outputs at line level. And they're also without, 192K as max, and then premium going higher to DSD and DXD. And now those cards, which are not, they are the same. There's not a new version at this moment in time. So this is a card that is, I think it's 2 years now, this version. But because of the new features of the HAPI Mk II in terms of the trimming, those cards will benefit from it as well. So that you can trim it individually, you can trim also the gain by 0.1 dB and so on. These are the analog cards that are available, and these are the digital cards. So you have also a MADI card that you can put into one slot, but of course you will eat up one slot, so you will only have one slot available for your analog in and outputs. This is 64 in and out, one MADI card, and the MADI can be, the MADI is optical and coaxial at the same time, and you can have it in multi and single mode. And this you have to order, because you cannot, once you order it, you cannot change it. It's not a setting, it's one or the other. And for those who work with Pro Tools HD, we have the PT64 card, which also enters one slot, and on which you can connect via HD mini Digilink cable, 32 and 32 on each side, 64 channels to the Pro Tools in 1FS. So you can have two cards, and you have 128 channels on that aspect, so that all your other cards would be available with the quality of merging cards to your Pro Tools as in analog inputs or analog outputs if required. You have something to add, Rune?
No, yeah, but it's a good overview of the various cards for sure. I know a lot of your guys are maybe first, can I use all my old cards in my new machines? And you have gone through. We have compatibility with that. I also know there is a lot of focus on Atmos and immersive audio recordings right now. If you, for instance, have an Anubis, add a HAPI Mkll and add an ADA card, and you basically have a full Dolby Atmos setup, monitor controlling at a relatively modest price, actually, for what you get out of that combination.
Yeah, and what is important, it's agnostic to the workstation. So you can work with whatever workstation as long as the workstation supports, obviously, the Atmos routing in terms of its bus structure. But one day you want to work more in a music environment on a Logic, and the next day on the Pro Tools, and the day after on a Pyramix. You can use all those different devices with your Atmos mixing directly with the right setup in the Dolby environment. Cool. Let me go to the emulator. So I have a little emulator. This emulator is actually representing what you would see on the OLED of your HAPI Mk II. So to make it very clear, let me just go to the next screen so it's black and we can see a little bit better. So basically, you remember the front panel has this OLED screen, and the OLED screen basically on the right side of the OLED screen, there's a little knob, and this knob you can turn, so you go up and down. I have to click on it. So you go up and down the menu, and then you can go, for example, in the menu, and you can see. So this would be the OLED screen. This you can see, for example, your DA so that it modulates, and so that you push your button and you move your button left, right, and you go through the menu. So my idea is not to go through all the menu to show you everything precisely. I think it's pretty much speaks for itself, but a few things. So first of all, you have your I/O, for example, you have your timecode, you have your status, what's in there, your synchronization, whether you synced to internal, over the network, word clock sync, and so on. What is interesting, your setup is that you change your format. So now you could go from 44.1, for example, or to 192 or down to DXD. You could also change your preset, but you change your routing, what outputs you want to send from the AES, for example. And this is important if you go to your modules now. So for those who have HAPI One versions, you will recognize, but yeah, this is the same in terms of the output, the plus 18 dB, the attenuation, but below you have now the trim. And in the trim, you can independently per channel go by steps of 0.1 dB and change the difference from one channel independently to the other. So this is one of the new possibilities. If I go back to the presets, this is the same. We have the presets as before, and we have the system as before. We have the network as before. So we have a few things that that have changed in the presets. Sorry, in the whole menu structure. Where I might perhaps go, what is more interesting is that once I open this, obviously, I can also open my my web browser. So for those who don't know what this is, before I was showing the screen that is represented on the OLED on the hardware device, and now here I open a browser, a web browser that is connected to the network to the HAPI, and I just type in the IP address over there. I can find it in very easy ways. Look into our webinars, you will find it. But this is now the representation as a remote control of my device. And now I have the same possibilities to change it. Now I just change it as a remote control, and I don't need to sit or to stand in front of my HAPI and do it from over there. But you recognize again, you have all those possibilities of routing, of possibilities of changing. And now if I go to the modules, that's what I wanted to show. And now the trim menu has been added here. So I can change it like this. And per 0.1 dB steps, I can change them from one to another. All right. So the how can I say, the main structure of the menu is very similar to what you know in HAPI One or Horus, but you have those new added features that you will find in there. Great. Let me move back to my presentation so we can go a step further. The web browser, I just showed it. And here I'm going to approach a little bit the infrastructure. So for those who know our products, who know our converters, this is something familiar, but I was thinking it is important to explain a little bit for those who don't know our products, how you connect it actually to your computer and how does this work together. So with HAPI Mkii, and obviously there are two worlds in this world. There's a Mac world and there's a Windows or PC world. And there's a third world, which is called Linux, that we also support. I'm not talking about it here because these are specific applications, but we also have solutions for Linux. Good. For the Mac world, we have what we call the VAD driver for core audio, virtual audio driver basically for core audio, that allows me to in and output 128 channels in all those different sample rate frequencies at the same time. I mean, one sample rate frequencies for all the channels. Huh? Don't misunderstand that. But I mean, if you go higher in sample frequency, it remains 128 channel. Up to 192 kilohertz, you install this device, you connect your Mac via Thunderbolt adapter to Ethernet gigabit, or directly to the gigabit if you have one on your Mac, and you connect your HAPI Mk II, and off you go, and you can work with your setup. On the Windows side, it's a bit different. You install what we call the MAD. It stands for Merging Audio Device. And it is a driver as well, but it's a bit more than a driver. Because in the Windows world, for those who come from Mac wouldn't know it, but and vice versa, in the Mac world, you have a function that is called aggregate. So basically, you have your web browser. You can play some audio into your workstation via the core audio, and you have this whole aggregation in the two worlds that is possible, which on the Windows side is not really possible. You have the Azure, which is the professional level for your workstation, and then you have what one calls the VDM, for Windows Driver Model, which is what allows you to connect, for example, to the web, to all the Windows audio infrastructure, let's say the non-professional Windows audio infrastructure. And with this MAD, you can mix both. So it means that you can use your workstation via Azure and at the same time use your web browser and redirect the audio from a web browser into your MAD and then have it either on your HAPI Mk II or on your workstation, on your DAW. And if you look at the way the channels behave when you go higher in sample rate, so you have 128 channels like on the Mac side in 1FS, but if you go higher, it shares by 2 each time. And this is how the infrastructure, or sorry, the architecture is done in the Azure for Windows. But what is important and interesting is that I can go higher. I can go up to DSD and up to PCM, 8 times PCM. That brings me to a 384 kilohertz. So you have advantages and disadvantages in one or the other, depending the way you look at it. Good. Other part of the infrastructure, my Animan is completely available with my HAPI Mk II, and the Animan, for those who don't know it, stands for Audio Network Manager. Basically, it's a virtual patch. You have your devices down here, either hardware, software, and your in and outputs will show up, and you connect. You connect it. You connect, for example, your outputs of the HAPI Mk II to your sorry, excuse me, I look at it the other way around. You connect the outputs of your workstation to the outputs of the HAPI Mk II, so this is enabled and works together, or the inputs to one another. But you can also have, for example, two workstations. Don't forget we're on a network. You have two workstations, one Logic and one Pro Tools, for example, or one Logic and one Reaper, let's say, and you can also send the audio over the network to the Reaper, and then from the Reaper to the HAPI, so that you can really mix and mash the way you want in a very smooth way and change the routing and all of that over this virtual patch called Animan. And on the hardware side, there are two options that are important to understand. One option is that you have a redundant power supply for those who suddenly, it is very important. We're talking, you remember at the very beginning, we're talking about having a redundancy for the network connection with this horrible name called ST2022-7. But if you are in a critical area and want this redundancy, then also it makes sense to have a power supply redundancy, as this power supply is always considered a bit a weak point. So this is available with HAPI Mk II as with HAPI I, and you also have as an option the DB15 breakout cable for the sync. Some people don't need it, but if you need timecode in and output or video reference, you need to trigger your HAPI to the house reference of your, in post-production, for example, of your studio. You will need the DB15 optional breakout cable to be able to connect all of that together. Great. I think we talked about a lot of things. Is there anything more to say, Rune? Do you have any remarks or things that I've forgotten?
No, I think you went through every detail that was good, and yeah, all is up and running, and production going in Switzerland. So
Yeah, so that's very important to say. HAPI Mk II is available. There is a big demand at the moment, so there's a tiny bit waiting time, but we're working hard to diminish as much as possible this waiting time. And yeah, I think that's it. Thanks for everything. If you have
Uh,
questions,
Any
please.
last questions out in the chat or anything?
Yeah, or you can continue. I mean, this video will once now the live will finish, it will remain on the YouTube channel so that you can continue asking questions there. We follow it as well, or through the usual channels over the social networks or over the email from the website and so on. Thank you for listening, and we'll keep you posted for the new webinars that will come in the future. Thank you very much. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, or evening, or night, depending where you are. And thank you, Rune, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.